Morning they released me, it was raining. Not the kind of soft Pacific Northwest drizzle I'd grown up with in Portland. This was a cold, sideways November rain that hit your face like a slap. I stood at the gate of Sheridan Federal Correctional Institution with a plastic bag containing my watch, my wallet with $43 in it, and a dress shirt that no longer fit across the shoulders. 18 months had put muscle where there used to be comfortable middle-aged softness. I'd had nothing else to do but work out and think. And I'd done a lot of thinking. The guard who processed my release was a young man, maybe 25, who handed me my paperwork without looking up. I signed where I was told to sign. He slid a bus voucher across the counter. I picked it up, folded it carefully, put it in my shirt pocket, and walked out into the rain. I didn't have an umbrella. I didn't care. Somewhere across town, in the house I had built, the house with the wraparound porch and the oak tree my son planted when he was 7 years old, my son and his wife were waking up to a Tuesday morning. Maybe they were having coffee. Maybe they were having coffee. Maybe they were watching the news. Maybe they thought that with me locked away, the worst was already over. They were wrong. Let me tell you who I was before all this, because it matters. My name is Eugene Harold Marsh. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years building a small commercial property management company in Portland, Oregon. Nothing glamorous, nothing that would make the business section of the Oregonian, but honest work. We managed apartment complexes, small office parks, strip malls. At our peak, we had 11 employees, a clean balance sheet, and a reputation in the local real estate community that I was genuinely proud of. My wife, Carol, God, I still reach for the phone sometimes to call her, passed from ovarian cancer 6 years ago. We had been married 38 years. After she died, I threw myself into the company harder than ever, partly because work was the only thing that kept the silence from becoming unbearable, and partly because I told myself I was building something to pass on to my son. His name is Brandon. He's 36. When he was a boy, he used to follow me around job sites on weekends, asking questions about everything. Why does this beam go here? What happens if the foundation shifts? How do you know if a contractor is lying to you? Smart kid. Curious. I was proud of him in a way I probably never said out loud enough, which is a regret I'll carry the rest of my life. He married a woman named Tessa 8 years ago. I liked her well enough at first. She was sharp, well-organized, had a way of taking charge of a room that reminded me a little of Carol. But where Carol's sharpness had warmth underneath it, Tessa's had something else. Something cooler. I told myself I was being a suspicious old widower who missed his wife and was taking it out on the daughter-in-law. I told myself that for years. I shouldn't have. About 4 years ago, Brandon started asking to be more involved in the business. He'd been working in commercial real estate on his own, mostly brokerage, some property acquisitions, and he made a reasonable case. I was getting older. The company would be his eventually. Why not start the transition now, while I was still there to guide it? He could take over the day-to-day operations, learn the books, build relationships with the vendors and tenants we'd worked with for decades. It made sense. It was logical. And I trusted my son the way you trust your own heartbeat, without question, without audit, without ever stopping to wonder whether the rhythm had changed. That was my mistake. I handed Brandon full signatory authority on the business accounts in March of that year. Tessa, who had a background in accounting, came on as our de facto CFO. I stepped back. I played golf twice a week. I visited Carol's grave on Sunday mornings. I started reading again for the first time since she'd gotten sick. I thought I was finally resting. I thought I had earned it. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in April, 14 months after I'd handed Brandon the keys to everything. It was a detective from the Portland Police Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit. His name was Detective Okafor. He had a flat, careful voice, the kind of voice designed to give you no information about what he already knows while he's gathering more. He asked if I was Eugene Marsh. He asked if I was the owner of Marsh Property Management, LLC. He asked if I was aware of any irregularities in the company's financial accounts. I told him I hadn't been involved in day-to-day operations for over a year. He asked if he could come speak with me in person. 2 days later, sitting in my own living room across from Detective Okafor and his partner, I learned what had been done in my name. Over the course of 14 months, approximately $1.4 million had been moved out of the company's operating accounts through a series of transactions that were, on paper, attributed to me. Consulting fees paid to 2 LLCs that I had allegedly formed, LLCs I had never heard of, whose registered agent information pointed to a mail forwarding service in Nevada. Wire transfers to a brokerage account in my name at a financial institution I had never done business with. Vendor payments to contractors who, when investigators looked into them, had no employees, no equipment, no physical address. All of it signed with my digital signature. All of it approved to an email account that bore my name. Mr. Marsh, Detective Okafor said, I have to ask you directly, do you authorize any of these transactions? No, I said. I've never seen any of this. He wrote something down. His partner was watching my face. Are you aware, Okafor continued, that there are approximately 230 emails in the company system sent from your account authorizing these transactions? I felt the room tilt slightly. I didn't send those emails. Do you have access to your email account currently? I do. When did you last change your password? And that's when I understood all at once the way you sometimes understand things in dreams, fully and without transition, that something had been constructed around me, that the ground I thought I was standing on had been paper all along. The next 6 weeks were the worst of my life, worse even than watching Carol die, and I say that knowing how terrible it sounds. When Carol was sick, I knew who the enemy was. I knew what I was fighting. I could sit beside her bed and hold her hand and be present in the most important way I knew how to be present. This was different. This was fighting smoke. I hired an attorney, a woman named Ms. Patricia Holt, a former federal prosecutor who came highly recommended by a colleague in the real estate community. She was calm and thorough and told me from the beginning that the case against me was, in her words, circumstantially dense, my digital signature, my email account, my company, my personal financial history showing no large unexplained deposits, which she said was in my favor, but also showing that I had lived comfortably for 30 years, which a prosecutor could argue meant I'd been skimming gradually rather than all at once. What about Brandon? I asked her in our third meeting. What about Tessa? She looked at me steadily. What about them? They had full access to everything. The accounts, the email system, the digital signature file. Brandon knew where I kept my passwords. Tessa set up the entire accounting software migration 2 years ago. Ms. Holt nodded slowly. I know. I looked at the same access logs you're looking at. Then why is the investigation focused on me? She was quiet for a moment. Because, she said, your son has already spoken to investigators, voluntarily, with his wife, and they have presented a coherent account of events that does not include them. I drove home from that meeting and sat in the driveway for 45 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I want to be precise about what happened next, because I've had a long time to think about it, and I don't want to exaggerate or dramatize what was already, without any embellishment, the most devastating thing I have ever experienced. My son testified against me. Not reluctantly, not with visible anguish. He sat across a conference table from federal investigators because the wire transfers had crossed state lines, which made it a federal matter eventually, and he described in detail how he had become concerned about irregularities in the company accounts, how he had brought his concerns to Tessa, who had a financial background, how they had traced the discrepancies back to transactions initiated from my email account at times when Brandon had not been in the office, how he had agonized for weeks before deciding he had an obligation to report what he'd found. He had documentation. Of course he did. Printed email chains, account statements with highlighted entries, a timeline. Tessa corroborated everything. My attorney told me about all of this afterward. I hadn't been present. I wasn't allowed to be. I sat in her office and listened to her lay it out, and I kept waiting to feel something. Rage, betrayal, grief. But what I actually felt, sitting there, was a strange, suspended calm, like the moment right before a car accident, when your brain hasn't yet processed what your eyes are seeing. He's going to be the prosecution's primary witness, Ms. Holt said. Yes, I said. Eugene, she set down her pen. I have to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Is there any possibility Any possibility at all that Brandon was acting on your behalf? That you had any arrangement with him that you haven't disclosed? I looked at her. He's my son, I said. She held my gaze. I know. I'm still asking. No, I said. There is no arrangement. I didn't take this money. My son and his wife took this money, and they have constructed a very careful story to make it look like I did. She picked up her pen again. Then that's what we're going to prove. We couldn't prove it. Not in time. The problem, Miss Holt explained to me in the weeks leading up to trial, was the email metadata. The transactions had been authorized through emails originating from my account, and while it was theoretically possible that someone with access to my credentials had sent them, proving that someone else had done so required forensic analysis of the email server architecture that we simply couldn't afford at the speed the prosecution was moving. A proper digital forensics examination would have taken months and cost more than I had liquid at that point, because the company accounts had been frozen as part of the investigation, and my personal savings had been largely depleted by legal fees. There was also the matter of a conversation I'd had with my son 8 months before the investigation began. A casual dinner conversation, the kind you have without thinking, in which I'd mentioned that a friend of mine had lost money in a bad investment, and I'd said something like, I always thought offshore accounts were for people who had something to hide. Brandon had remembered this conversation. He'd mentioned it to investigators. In his account, it was evidence that I was familiar with offshore financial structures and had discussed them openly. It was a dinner conversation. I'd been talking about my friend's bad luck. That's all it was. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On the morning of the 3rd day, they returned a verdict of guilty on 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of money laundering. The judge sentenced me to 30 months. With good behavior and program credits, I would serve 18. I stood at the defense table and heard the verdict, and I did not look at my son. I made a decision in that moment that I would not look at him. Not in that courtroom, not when they processed me, not if he came to visit me, not until I had something to say that was worth saying. He came to visit me 4 times during my incarceration. 4 times I refused to see him. Tessa came once. I refused that too. I had nothing to say yet. There is a man I want to tell you about, because he matters to this story and because he deserves to be remembered. His name was Clifford. No, wait, I can't use that name. That's someone from my old neighborhood. His name was August. Auguste Derray. He was 58 years old, from Baton Rouge originally, and he was serving a 4-year sentence for tax evasion. A genuine case, he was the first to tell you. No frame-up. He'd made choices he regretted. He'd been a bookkeeper for a family-owned construction company, and he'd helped the owner hide income for years before the IRS caught up with both of them. August had read everything he could find about tax law, securities law, and financial forensics during his first 2 years at Sheridan. Not to appeal his conviction, he told me. He'd made peace with that. But because he had the kind of mind that needed to understand how things worked, even things that had cost him dearly, he became my education. Every evening after dinner, for the better part of a year, August and I sat at a corner table in the common area, and he walked me through the architecture of financial fraud. Not how to commit it, how to find it, how forensic accountants trace money through shell companies, how metadata in email systems can be examined at the server level rather than the client level, which is a different and harder thing to alter, how the records of a Nevada registered agent service can be subpoenaed and cross-referenced with bank account opening documents to establish a timeline that either fits or doesn't fit the story someone is telling. Your problem, August told me one evening, about 4 months into our sessions, is that your attorney was looking for evidence to introduce at trial. What you actually need is someone to look for the mistakes your son made before he knew he was going to need everything to be perfect. I looked at him. What do you mean? I mean that the people who set you up did it carefully, but they did it in a hurry. The LLCs were formed 8 months before the money started moving. The email account was accessed from outside your usual IP range on 17 occasions. I'm guessing your attorney knows this, but wasn't able to get the server records in time. The brokerage account in your name. He tapped the table. Who opened it? Who physically walked into a branch or logged in from what IP address and opened that account? That's a paper trail. That's a real human being, Eugene. Someone had to do it. An attorney can subpoena those records post-conviction, I said. Yes, August said. If you can afford the right attorney, and if someone with the right credentials files the right post-conviction motions. He looked at me evenly. You know anyone in the financial crime space who might want to help you? As it happened, I did. A former colleague, a man named Desmond who had worked with me for 11 years before starting his own consulting firm, had written to me 3 times since my conviction. I hadn't written back because I was too proud and too ashamed. That night, I wrote him back. What Desmond found with the help of a forensic accountant he brought in named Dr. Watkins from a Portland-based firm took 8 months to fully assemble and 4 months to present through the proper post-conviction channels. The brokerage account in my name had been opened online. The opening session originated from an IP address registered to Tessa's parents' home in Beaverton, Oregon, not Brandon and Tessa's home. Tessa's parents' house, where Tessa had been staying for a long weekend 7 months before the investigation began, attending her niece's birthday party. The timing of the account opening matched that weekend exactly. The 17 email sessions that had accessed my account from outside my usual location range, August had been right about those, had originated from 2 sources. 11 from an IP address at Brandon and Tessa's home, 6 from a public library in southeast Portland 3 blocks from Tessa's gym. The Nevada Registered Agent Service, when subpoenaed, produced documents showing that both Shell LLCs had been formed by a person who had provided a driver's license for identity verification. The name on that license was mine. The photograph on the submitted document was not. It was a close photograph, similar build, similar coloring, the kind of thing that works when a low-paid registered agent service is processing 50 incorporation requests a day and not scrutinizing each one. But it was not me. Dr. Watkins submitted a 47-page forensic report. Desmond's attorney filed a motion for post-conviction relief in federal court. The U.S. Attorney's Office, to their credit, did not fight it once they reviewed the IP records. I was released on a Tuesday in November, 18 months into a 30-month sentence, with a formal order vacating my conviction and a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office expressing, and I want to quote this precisely because it still makes me laugh in a hollow kind of way, regret for the burden this prosecution placed upon Mr. Marsh. Regret. For 18 months of my life. For my company, which had collapsed while I was incarcerated. For my reputation in the Portland business community, which had taken damage that no letter from a U.S. attorney was going to fully repair. For 11 employees who had lost their jobs. For all of it, regret. I folded that letter and put it in the same plastic bag with my watch and my $43, and I walked out into the rain. Brandon and Tessa were arrested on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after my release. I was not there when it happened. I had made a deliberate choice not to be. I found out when Desmond called me, and I was sitting on the porch of the small rental house I'd taken in northeast Portland, drinking coffee and reading a book. Desmond said, "They've been taken in." I said, "All right." He said, "How are you feeling?" I thought about it honestly. "Quiet," I said. That was the right word. The federal charges against them were substantial: wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity fraud for the driver's license document, and obstruction of justice for Brandon's testimony against me. Their combined exposure, Ms. Holt told me when she called later that afternoon, was significant, potentially more than a decade each if convicted on all counts. I don't know exactly what sentences they received. I chose not to follow the trial closely. I know from Desmond that they both pleaded guilty, separately, which I understand means one of them cooperated against the other, and that they are both currently incarcerated. That's all I know and all I want to know. There is a child in this story that I haven't mentioned yet, and I've left her for now because thinking about her is the thing that still makes my hands shake slightly when I let myself sit with it. Brandon and Tessa have a daughter. Her name is Maya. She's 5 years old. When Brandon was first arrested, before the full picture had emerged, I went once to Tessa's parents' house, the same house in Beaverton where Tessa had opened the fraudulent brokerage account, which was an irony I did not dwell on, to see if I could see Maya. Tessa's mother answered the door. She looked at me for a long moment. I had not planned what to say. I said, "I'm not here about Brandon or Tessa. I just want to know Maya is all right." She let me in. Maya was sitting on the living room floor, assembling a puzzle of farm animals. She looked up when I came in the room. She has her father's eyes and her grandmother Carol's mouth, and when I saw that I had to breathe carefully for a moment before I could speak. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. "Hi," she said. She held up a piece of the puzzle. "This is a goat." "That is definitely a goat," I said. I sat down on the floor and we assembled the rest of the puzzle together. Tessa's mother brought me a cup of coffee and sat in the armchair across the room and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. When I left, Maya hugged my leg at the door. I put my hand on the back of her head and stood there for a moment, and that was the first time since I'd walked out of Sheridan that I cried. I want to be honest about what I have not been able to resolve. I have not forgiven my son. I am not sure I ever will, and I have stopped pretending to myself that forgiveness is something I owe him, or owe myself, or owe anyone as a condition of moving forward. People will tell you that forgiveness is for yourself, not for the other person. Maybe that's true, but I also know that there is a difference between releasing something and pretending it wasn't what it was. What Brandon did was not a mistake. It was not a lapse of judgment or a momentary weakness. It was a sustained, calculated, deliberate effort to destroy me, to take everything I'd built over 30 years, everything Carol and I built together, and transfer it to himself while watching me go to prison for it. I know that. I hold that knowledge steady, like a stone in my hand, and I do not set it down and call it something softer than what it is. What I have chosen to do, instead of forgiveness, is build. Desmond and I have started a new company, smaller than Marsh Property Management. 3 employees. We manage 6 properties for now. It's humbling and it's good. I work with my hands more than I used to. I show up on site. I know every tenant by name. I have a standing dinner with August every other Friday. He was released 4 months after I was, and he now works as a forensic accounting consultant. Informal work, contract work. But it suits him, and he's better at it than most people who have MBAs and have never spent a day understanding the thing they're auditing from the inside out. I introduced him to Desmond. The 3 of us have lunch sometimes. August always orders the same thing, a patty melt and unsweetened iced tea. I like knowing that about him. I see Maya twice a month. Tessa's parents have temporary guardianship, while the legal situation with Brandon and Tessa is resolved. And they have been, I don't have another word for it, gracious. More than gracious. I think they are ashamed of what their daughter did, and they are trying to make amends in the only way available to them, which is to let Maya's grandfather be part of her life. Last month, Maya and I drove out to Multnomah Falls on a Saturday. She wore a yellow raincoat and rubber boots with frogs on them, and she held my hand on the trail and narrated everything she saw with the comprehensive authority of a 5-year-old who has decided that all information is equally important and should be shared immediately. A squirrel, a wet rock that looked like a seal, a man with a very large backpack. A cloud. I let her talk. I listened to every word. Standing at the base of the falls, with the mist on our faces and the sound filling everything around us, she looked up at me and said, completely out of nowhere, "Grandpa, do you know what my favorite animal is?" "What?" I said. "Elephants," she said, "because they remember everything." I don't know if you meant anything by that. She's 5. But I stood there in the mist for a moment and I thought, yes, that's right. That's exactly right. Some things should be remembered. I walked out of that prison in the rain with nothing but a plastic bag and $43, and I did not know yet exactly how it would go. Only that I had survived something that was meant to destroy me, and that the people who built it were not as careful as they thought, and that I was still standing. I am still standing. I still remember everything. And Maya had on her frog boots, and the falls were loud, and the mist was cold on my face, and I held her hand all the way back down the trail. That's enough. For today, that is more than enough. I keep thinking about something August said to me. Not the forensic accounting lessons, not the IP address theory, but something much simpler he told me one evening when I was still raw and angry and hadn't yet figured out how to sit with what had been done to me. He said, The people who do things like this, they always believe they're smarter than the truth. And the truth doesn't care. I've turned that over in my hands 1,000 times since then. What Brandon and Tessa built was careful. It took planning, patience, access they had earned through trust I had freely given. They studied how I spoke in emails. They knew which vendors I used, which financial language I favored, which accounts I never checked closely because I'd handed them over without a second thought. They understood me well enough to impersonate me convincingly, and that, the intimacy of it, the knowledge required, is what made it so devastating. You can't be betrayed by a stranger. Not like that. But here's what they didn't account for. Every choice has a geometry to it. Every decision leaves a shape in the world. You open a fraudulent brokerage account from your mother-in-law's house on a Saturday afternoon in October, and that action exists somewhere, in a server, in a log, in a record that a careful person will eventually find. You send 11 emails from your own home IP address on a system you thought you controlled, and those 11 decisions are sitting there waiting. The past doesn't disappear. It accumulates. I think about the 18 months I spent inside, and I don't pretend it was anything other than brutal. But I also know that those 18 months did something to me that a comfortable life hadn't. They stripped everything down to what I actually was underneath the company, the reputation, the golf games, the careful, quiet life I'd built after Carol died. What I found, when all of that was gone, was that I still had a working mind and a refusal to stop using it. August taught me to think structurally, to look for the seams in a constructed story, to trust that sloppy work leaves evidence, even when it looks clean. That discipline, the willingness to keep thinking when thinking was all I had, turned out to be the thing that saved me. And I think about the 3 times Brandon came to that facility and asked to see me, and the 3 times I sent word back that I would not. People have asked me if that was hard. It wasn't. Not because I'd stopped loving him. I don't think that switch works the way people imagine. But because I understood, very clearly, that I had nothing to say to him yet. That sitting across a table from him, in that room, in that context, would have been a kind of capitulation I wasn't willing to make. I chose to wait until I had something real to offer the situation. That patience, that refusal to act before the moment was right, was the only power I had, and I held on to it. What I want to say, if the story means anything beyond my own particular misfortune, is that the quality of your character is not tested when things are going well. Brandon had everything. A father who loved him, a business being handed to him, a future that required nothing more than basic decency to collect. He failed the only test that mattered, and I, with nothing but a plastic bag and $43, and an old friend willing to make phone calls on my behalf, passed it. Maya has her frog boots. The falls are still loud in November. I hold her hand on the trail and I remember everything. That's the whole of it, really. Do right by people. Keep your mind sharp when everything else is taken. And don't stop standing up just because someone knocked you down.